How many of you were here last year? Awesome. Okay. So this talk builds on top of the one I gave last year. So last year I was talking about quite a few techniques that we can use as developers, as technical people, to help to design software, but also align that design with the, the business and the product. But last year's talk was very focused on the techniques themselves, but not on the process. So as I was evolving that idea, so this year, after the last talk, we were able to evolve some of those ideas, try out a few things in some projects, and I would like to start sharing that with you as well. Um, the way I see is we still have a divide between business and technology. It's much better now. I think an agile, the agile movement, if you like, contributed massively to bring us together. But it's still not there yet. And of course, what I'm going to describe here, I'm not going to talk about the exceptions. So there are companies that are extremely mature, where business and technology work really, really tight. And there are companies that are on the other extreme that are completely separate. Most of the things that I'm going to be describing are related to the average company, is what we see in most of the places. We still have this tension of creating technical debt. When you go to places or when you go to organizations, we still hear developers talking about not having time to improve their systems, right? So there's always this tension, like business saying, we need more features. Developers say, like, yeah, but we are struggling to deliver at the speed that you want because we have a lot of technical debt. And then because they have technical debt, they cannot go faster. Then they accumulate more technical debt because they don't have time, and then you are always in these vicious circles. So these, of course, we need to figure out a way to avoid that. I start thinking about many things that happen in this process. Like how we are working. The process, I mean, how we are collaborating with the business. One of the things that really struck me was running software projects as projects. So, for example, when you have a project, you normally have a thing that you want to achieve. You have a goal. You have a deadline. You have a budget. You have some cost control. So everything you do in a project, all the end justify the means, because you want to get to that end, right? So the problem with the product mindset or the project mindset is projects are great for something that starts and ends. And you want to optimize the means to that end. But a software product, and by product, by the way, I mean any software that you are building. It's not necessarily a commercial software that is used by customers and stuff. Even an internal software is a product for the scope of this talk. The problem with a software product is that it's in continuous evolution. It doesn't stop. So that the project mindset is not a great fit. Because if you're always working with a project mindset, you say, like, for the next few months, I want to achieve that. And then you rush to try to achieve that without worrying about the means. So it's okay to accumulate technical debt or to not look after the technical strategy because you are focused on the goal. And you keep doing that, one project at a time. So, but the softwares are deteriorating because you're not really thinking on the means, on the lifelong structure of your code. So, and we end up talking about budget and costs instead of talking about continuous investment, because in a software product, what you have is a sequence of valuable increments. And we should be looking at not as costs, but as a continuous investment. So there is this massive tension between the way that we manage projects and the very nature of a software product. Because of this tension, there is a lot of work that goes into product design. By product design, I mean the product strategy, not the UX side of it. So designing a product to the market or to the internal use, there's a lot of work that goes in there. So all the business people talking to stakeholders, so creating a full strategy. And that is done normally isolated from technology. So once they decide their strategy, they tend to create a product backlog. And that is only then that the teams are coming in. So once the business has a product backlog, they will prioritize the items. And at that point, the development team will come in to discuss the top items. But they were not part of the whole product definition, if you like. The problem that we have here is we have a strategic view of the product, but quite often with a reactive design. Because on the technology side, we are always working at the top level of the backlog, but we don't really are part of the wider strategy. So, and as we are pushed to finish one story after another, because we don't have time to architect the system and we don't know exactly the whole direction, the whole vision of the product, we start working one story after another, and at some point we end up begging for time for refactoring and things like that. So in order to fix that, we need to start pushing to explaining to the business the value of us designing software. We are quite bad at it, we developers. We want to be part of the meetings. We want to be part of the discussions with the business. We want to say, no, I want to go to these meetings and contribute. I want to understand what they are trying to build and then go there and contribute. The problem is that we don't know exactly how, right? So we want the business to explain things to us, but not always we have much to offer to them. And we need to go to the business. So if you want to be part of those meetings, the strategic meetings, we need to have something to add to it. And for that, we need to start moving our head from the technical, or we need to be able to explain the value, the business value of the technical things that we want to do. So design, for example, the way that most of us look at design is quite limiting. Because we look at software design on a technical side. So for example, we look at design as a way to organize our code, a way for us to figure out what is where so that I can maintain. So although certainly design serves that purpose, but that's also a very limited view on software design. So software design for me has a much wider role in a product, in a software product. So, for example, if we want to enable different teams or different groups of people to work in parallel, we need to design our software for that. So the design of the software should enable people to work in parallel without stepping on each other's toes. So if we want to achieve continuous delivery, which is for a lot of companies is still quite a faraway dream, we need to be able to automate all the processes. So the testing, the deployment, monitoring production. In order to make it easier, we need to design for that. So we see, for example, a lot of dependency. So when we want to organize the software, we change one place, we need to change the other. There's this ripple effect. Again, in order to avoid that, we need to design for that. Security, we need to design for that. So software design is not only there to organize code, but also to enable the way that we need to work, or the way that the business wants to work. There are many different levels of design. So for example, you have enterprise architecture. So there are more than 20. If you start Googling for the different levels of design, you find tons. I'm just going to focus on the ones that are more relevant to this talk. So enterprise architecture normally is how your product fits in a wider ecosystem, right? If you're building a software, so how does it connect to the rest? So then there is like solutions architect. Solutions architect is normally, I'm simplifying because again, there's no consensus on this. Solutions architect is normally the solution of your product. Is how you're going to do certain things in your project, how you're going to split certain things. Then the technical architecture is one level down. Is which kind of technology you're going to use, the APIs, the actual database and SLAs and stuff like that. That comes to the technical architecture. And then we have like what I call macro design and micro design. So basically the architecture stays on the blue lines, so that's how our boxes interact with the external world. So our solution might be composed by multiple boxes, and they all interact with the external world. That would be the enterprise architecture and solutions architecture. The technical architecture normally is within our boxes. I mean, like how our own boxes talk to each other. And then macro and micro design is all about the components. For example, the macro design is, are we going to have a delivery mechanism in a core domain? Are we going to have hexagon architecture? Are we going to have like components and stuff like that? So it's that overall structure of each box that I call macro design. And then inside, there are all these small classes and functions and methods, and that's what I call micro design. So all of these is extremely important. If you are creating a large-scale product, thinking about all those levels of design is important. But when do we do them? How much time do we spend on them? And how do we fit these different levels of abstraction in terms of design into our process? So when we are working with our product owners, we are picking up stories and stuff. So when do we do all of that? And quite often we struggle to find the time to actually think about that or even do that. So let me just get some water. So in order to start fitting these into our process, we need to understand how a product design. So what is the process to design a product? So I was looking at many different product methodologies, not only software, so outside the software world. And there are many different schools of thought in how you should go about designing a product. And designing, again, creating the whole strategy from the ideation to the real product being sold. So I condensed a lot of those things into 4 stages. So there is an ideation phase. Then there is a strategy phase, a planning phase, and then a development phase. That's normally how product design is structured. So let's have a look at what those phases are. So in the ideation, we try to define the business goals. So what are we trying to achieve as a business? And we come up with a viable product vision to satisfy these goals. The viable is a very important word here, because quite often we create aspirational products, but we don't know necessarily if they are viable. We want to do that, it sounds a good idea, but not a lot of time is spent here on the viable. So once we have this idea of which product we want to build, then normally those products tend to be big. There are loads of things to be done. So we need to come up with a strategy to tackle those things. We cannot build the whole product in one go, so we need to create a strategy of what we're going to tackle first, how we're going to divide those things. So once we have that technical vision and a high-level plan to evolve that product, then we need to go to more details. That's when the planning comes in. So now that we hold the overall evolution of the product and technical vision, so let's now go one level down in details and start planning of what we need to do as we move along. So in the planning, we will take a lot of things into consideration, our capacity, risks, budget deadlines, everything else. So that's where the planning comes in, because it will help us to prioritize things. So once we have that, then we come to the development side, right? So that we refine those requirements, build them, test, and deploy. So this looks very waterfallish, right? So we rejected it as a waterfall because what we were trying to do was we were trying to do all those phases for the whole product, for the whole project. So we would do the ideation for the whole thing, and we would have the strategy for the whole thing, with the planning for the whole thing and development for the whole thing. So although that's normally a bad idea, the phases themselves and what we do in each phase is not. So thinking about those different levels and planning at those different levels is extremely important. We just don't need to do everything up front. So what we can do, we can try to make this iterative and fit that into an agile process. So if you look at an agile process, how does it work in general, right? I'm not being too specific with Scrum or Kanban, and so that's a more detailed level for me. But normally, how an agile process works. We have a product definition, so there is a product vision somewhere. Then after that product vision, we create a product roadmap. The product roadmap has some milestones. Each milestone has some minimum viable increments, or you call them features or stories, whatever you like. So then, then you take each one of those increments. So each milestone has a bunch of increments prioritized. We take one increment at a time. We break them down into work items, and then we work one work item at a time. As soon as we finish the work item, we take the next increment. As soon as we finish all the increments, we go to the next milestone. And then as soon as we finish the milestone, we review the whole thing and keep going with the milestones. So that's, in a nutshell, how a normal agile project is structured. So how does it fit with the product design phases? So if we try to make a correlation between the agile phases and the product design phase, you would have this kind of mapping. So while we are defining the product, this is the ideation phase. When you are creating the roadmap of our product, this is the strategy phase. So creating milestones, valuable increments, so this is when we are planning. And then, of course, as we are getting the increments, working on them, that's where we are developing. And that keeps going back. So normally in an agile process, again, if you have iterations or not, or if you have a continuous flow, that's a little bit less relevant in this case. But like normally we were working just to give you an idea of time. I'm not prescribing the time, but normally we would work in every work item in just a matter of a few days. Every new valuable increment will be done in 1-2 weeks. Milestones normally are measured in a few months, like 2-3 more months, and then we end up reviewing the product every few months. So we have that, but that's not enough, because what's happening when we see this, although this looks really cool from a business perspective, we have the whole product strategy being done at this level, right? This side in here, that is the strategic side of the product, very rarely we have technology involved. So we end up getting involved in here. So the handover from the 3 phases to this one is actually the product backlog. So there is a whole context that we are missing. So, and then because we work here, our work is very limited to a few iterations. So when it gets to us, we need to pick up the next increment and work in 1-2 days, 5 days, whatever. We need to deliver that next. Pick the next one, 1-2 days, deliver, next. So we are always working one increment at a time. But we are not having an opportunity to actually create a strategy for our software, because we just don't even have the time. And the strategy, creating a strategy in here is way too late, right? So another problem that we have with this model is a lot of the business aspirations, they are aspirations, because they are not taking into account the technical risks, the technology, all the unknowns that we have in here. And they are already in their heads making commitments for timelines and stuff. But they have just one side of the problem. Because we are building a software, there's nothing on the technology side to justify the aspirations that they have, or to actually support the aspirations that they have. So when should we architect our system anyway? So when should we bring the strategic side to software design in this workflow? So there is a way to start aligning the technical strategy to the product strategy. So the same way that the product strategy goes through phases or levels of abstraction. So for example, at the ideation phase, you see the product as a big thing, as a blob. So this product will be roughly this. We might have these core features, but you're looking at a very, very high level. At this point, we also need to start talking about technology at the high level. As we are going down levels of abstraction, so for example, as you start refining your product understanding into features, milestones, and stuff, we should also start refining the high level, the abstraction that we are using to design the system. So the same way that we're coming from product definition roadmap, we should start thinking about technical feasibility, product architecture, and as we go down this path, so as soon as you get to the work item, then we'll be looking at the small. But at here, we are looking at the macro. So that's how we can start fitting the different levels of abstraction, aligning them to the levels of the abstraction of the product. So let's look at all those things in isolation, so we can try to make a little bit more sense of those. So let's start with ideation. So there are different types of, how can I say, products. So in certain companies, in startup is quite often the case. The product is the business, right? So the whole business model is created on top of the product. And in other places, the company is a much bigger company and has loads of products. Some of them external, some of them internal, and stuff. So for the companies where the product is the core of the company, so one technique that we can use to understand the strategy of the business so we can be more strategic, or at least on the ideation phase, we can use what we call the business model canvas. So there is a full book by Alexander Osterwalder that is quite a nice book to read. I certainly recommend that. So this is a very quick way to understand the business model. So basically, like what you have is, you have a customer segment, so a segment of customers that you want to satisfy. You have your value propositions. That's the business that you are offering to those customers. Then there is the way that you're gonna, the kind of relationship you're gonna have with that segment. So, for example, are you gonna provide a service to them, or they are gonna come to your service and do everything themselves, like e-commerce? They come in, they search, they buy, and so, but you don't interact much to them. We just provide the tools. Or are you going to have a co-creation of value? For example, YouTube or social media. So you are co-creating value with your customers. So there are many different types of relationships. The channels is how you're going to provide that service to your customers. And then you can talk about the revenue streams. On the back, what you have is what are the key activities that we need to do internally to support that value proposition, the key resources that we're going to use in terms of people, money, machinery, everything else, if there are any partnerships that we need to do, and also the cost structure. So this is a very cool way of looking at a business model. And for products, software products that we are building, when they are the core of the company, having this vision will help us massively in the ideation phase, because then we clearly understand what the business is, and it will be much easier for us to understand what we need to do on the technical side for the validation of this model. But most of the products that we work on, they are just one of the many softwares that the company has. So for that, we can go down one level in the ideation phase and just focus more on the value propositions and customer segments. So it's important to, in this phase of the ideation, what we are thinking really is the vision for the product. So the vision for the product is not a plan that we follow step by step. This is one of the mistakes that we have, that we make in projects. People create not a vision, but they create a plan, a rigid plan that is transformed into a backlog, and then you start following that backlog one story after another. So the idea here is to create a vision. A vision is a direction, right? And then we might go, not in a straight line, but it's guiding our work. So we can go down one level and think about value propositions and customer segments. So there is another technique, there's a subset of the previous, by the same person. It's called value proposition canvas. So basically, we try to understand what our customers, and customers, again, that doesn't necessarily mean external customers, but even internal users, or even internal systems. So I prefer to call them actors, by the way. There are the things interacting with our system, or they need something from us. So what is the job that they are trying to do? What are the jobs? So why do they need that? So what they're trying to do. So then when they do these jobs, what gain are they expecting to have while doing the job? and what are the pains that they have while doing that job. So understanding that already gives us a great context to provide a solution. Because then what we can say, so once we understand that, what are the products and services that we can offer to that customer? And those products and services, they need to focus on either relieving some pain or to create some gain for the product. So this helps us to shape the scope of our product, our vision. And we can play with it as well. So you can create different value propositions to different customer segments. So are we going to have different multiple value propositions to the same customer segment? Can we have a single value proposition to multiple customer segments? So you can play with these ideas very quickly and cheaply. So this helps us with the product definition. Once we have that, then we need to know if that is feasible. And that's normally what is not done. So we create that aspiration, but we don't validate if it's technically feasible. Technically feasible is not everything. Most of the things are possible to build, but is it feasible? Is it viable? So what we need to look at here is like, should we go ahead with this product? So is there anything we should change to make it viable or cheaper? So is it sustainable moving forward? So what are the things that we should be aware while building it? What are the risks? So here, from a technical perspective, what we can do to help the business is to identify the main functional areas of the product. Because normally at this point in here, the system is too big. It's very difficult to reason about all the different parts of it. So we can start separating the functional areas. So breaking down the problem into smaller parts and reasoning about them independently. And then we can start doing experiments, proof of concepts, understand what we can buy, build and integrate. So this is a thing that quite often we skip. Because we are developers, we go straight to building software. But sometimes there are loads of other solutions out there that we can just integrate and we can get it done. So all of those things, they will impact this product definition. As soon as we go on a technical feasibility exercise, this will feed that information back to the business. And that will reshape the idea of the product. So this is an exercise that we've done with a new client. So there's some of the members of the team out in the audience. I saw them. So basically, that's what we wanted to achieve. So we wanted to create a technical vision for their product. It's an existing product that we are modernizing, very large, 16 million lines of code, so quite an old system, and we are modernizing that. So what we found was different people in the business see the system in a completely different way. So we had around 20 people coming to the workshop, and they were directors of the company, there were salespeople, there was head of QA, there were some architects, senior developers. We brought all those people together and said, like, let's see if we can create a vision together, a vision that everyone shares in terms of the different areas of the system. That's what we were looking for. I'm going to speed up because I won't have time to go through everything I want. So in this exercise, so in a matter of 2 days, we were able to take different views from completely different people and align into the core parts of the application. Was it perfect? No, but that's a way to get started. Because once we understood the different functional areas of the system, we now can reason about them independently and create a vision for them and decide where we're going to start. I can give you more information during the breaks if you want to. So how does this interplay work? So once we do that, we are able to create a business and technology alignment. So this is a thing that doesn't happen at the very beginning. So a shared and more realistic product vision. So we avoid the tension moving forward because we are working together. And then this creates a good context for a proactive and supportive technical strategy. So how often do we do that? It depends on the maturity of your product. If you are in a startup, like creating a brand new market, you need to do that far more often. If you are a more stable business, you are just creating something that already exists, has an established market, you need to do less often. So once we have that vision, how do we go from there? So what we do in the strategy phase. So one of the things that we need to do is to understand all the major risks, all the constraints that we have. So we cannot build the whole product at the same time. So we need to create a strategy to evolve the product gradually. So this would not naturally lead us to kind of a product roadmap, right? So we would take constraints like, for example, regulated environments, SLAs, budget, company organization, all those kind of stuff should be taken into account when you are creating a product strategy. So there are different ways of, in the roadmap, when you want to create a roadmap, there are different kinds of mindsets that you can apply. So one of them is the lean startup. So the lean startup is a bunch of MVPs, like minimum viable product. So you create an idea, you build that quickly, you push that out, you measure, you collect some data, you learn from it, new MVP, new MVP. So the way of working on a lean startup is a sequence of MVP. So you create a hypothesis, and then you build that, validate that hypothesis. This way of working is great when you trying out a new market. It's not so easy to go and ask your customers because they might not even exist yet, or they might not understand what you're trying to build. So for really cutting-edge business, cutting edge in terms of new ideas, this is a great way of working. Most of the systems are not in this level. They are more in this level. So basically, it's a more stable proposition in terms of business. So this is the design thinking. There is more emphasis on analyzing or speaking to your customers, doing some market research. So as you are building, the increments are not just hypotheses that you are trying to prove. You are already going for the gold. You are already trying to push out a minimum marketable feature that they call. And then your product is a sequence of marketable features. You go more assertive in what you want to do. So those are different ways of working. They don't rule each other out. It's more about aligning your product strategy according to your product and company. So once we create a roadmap, regardless of which way you are going, we need to create an architecture. So because now we have an idea of what we need to do, so we can start going, we can start taking those functional areas at a much higher level and breaking them down even further. Because we need to understand what goes where. So if you want to enable continuous delivery, if you want to work in parallel, we need to define the technology stack, all those kind of things. We will need to refine the things that we've done in the technical feasibility and start breaking those things apart so that we can create a technical strategy to support that product roadmap. So the architecture that we are creating is designed to support the direction of the business as well. So the interplay between those things is like there is a common understanding of the business and technology and technical strategy. There is a technical architecture to support the business. More realistic and sustainable product roadmap. This is extremely important, right? As we are creating a technical strategy, we are being more strategic on the technology. So it creates a more sustainable thing, a more concrete thing, because we are taking not only the business aspirations but also the technical challenges, combining them and then creating a single backlog. And then, of course, the modularization will help us to plan. So that leads us to planning. So now that we have a high-level modularization, we can start thinking about minimum viable increments. We constantly talk about features, MVPs, so minimum viable products or minimum marketable features, as the main items in our backlog or milestones. I think that those terminologies, they are not often accurate, because it focuses always on the client and making money, which is great. I think that is a good thing. But there is far more things that we need to do that brings value to the business. Sometimes an increment should all be about increasing security, making it easier to maintain the software in production, or monitoring, or being compliant to a regulation. So all those things, they have value to the business. But because we don't think like that, we think about it should be a minimum viable product or feature. We are always thinking about the external world. And we don't do much to maintain that product, to create a healthy product, technically. But if you change the terminology and if we start talking about minimum viable increment or minimum valuable increment, then we have a chance to go to the business and say, this is the value of investing on this technical thing that we need to build. So how do we create those minimum valuable increments? So one of the techniques that we have is to do impact mapping. So impact mapping, I don't know if Goiko is in the audience, but he's around. Oh, there he is. So if you want to know more about impact mapping, the guy that created is on the audience. So basically, you have a goal. I normally like to use impact mapping for milestones, right? So milestones, I'll be focused on 3 months. I think that milestones are things that we don't do enough and we should do more. We normally go from a product vision straight to user stories. And we don't create checkpoints of the business evolution. So I think that working with milestones is quite good because it forces us to think about real business value in a shorter period of time and not only the aspirational goal of the product, that it might be far away. So if you apply impact mapping for the milestone, so then you have a goal for the milestone. Each milestone, you need to know what you're trying to achieve. Who are the actors involved on it? Like people, so internal, external people, sometimes even systems. What is the impact or the behavior that you want them to have, or how they will contribute to the goal? These first 3 levels here are all about the business. And then the last level is all about like what we need to build or to have to enable this impact or behavior for this actor to contribute to that goal. So this is a cool way to very quickly, when you do this exercise with business, you very quickly can start validating the things that we want to build by value. So this can generate your backlog. So you can look at this as like, what are the things that will generate more value towards the goal? Or will contribute more towards the goal. So you have this discussion, and you start building your backlog, your product backlog, according to that exercise. So this helps with the planning side on the process. So what we do on the technical side? On the technical side, what we want to do is we want to create a plan to enable multiple teams to work in parallel. We want to create a plan to achieve continuous delivery. We want to create a plan in how we're going to test that, how we're going to split that. So do we have any dependencies? Are there anything that is coupled in there in terms of data? Or, I don't know, one thing needs to be done before the other. So this kind of technical analysis needs to be part of our plan. And we need to design our system to enable all those things that we want to have while we are building that. So there are many different kind of exercises that we do in here on a technical level. So you can take those valuable increments and do a mapping, a functional mapping. So if you want to do this increment, what are the different modules of my system that this journey that we are building for the MVI is going to touch? What is the relationship between the modules? So also we can do some mock-ups as well. So how the users would interact with my system. How I'm going to prepare my system in terms of components or even services. So this is all part of the plan because understanding this will generate, so as soon as you do this kind of analysis, you discover a lot of unknowns, you discover some risks, you discover the cost. Certain things might be extremely expensive to build. So this exercise will help to reshape these as well. So even the priorities that you have in your backlog will be reshaped or split or removed as soon as we understand more what we're going to do in the technical side. So what is the interplay between them? So technical effort, risks, and dependencies impact prioritization of MVIs. Easier to size MVIs when high-level technical details are known. So it's much easier for you to reason about the things that we are building when we understand what is the business and also which kind of solution we plan to use. So helps to distribute work across teams and so on and so forth. So technical solution designed to support continuous delivery. This item is quite important. So we are designing our system to support continuous delivery. For me, that's the main goal of Agile, is to continuous delivery, is the quick inspect and adapt, always going live. We need to design for that. We need to plan for that. So this is one way that could support that. And finally, we get to the development side. So here is more traditional, right? So it interactively evolve the product one minimum valuable increment at a time. So that's very simple to understand because that's normally where we work, most of us, right? So there's not a lot of surprises in here. So what we normally need to do at this stage, we need to take all the MVIs, the increments, break them into work items, work one work item at a time, and for each MVI, we will have the whole cycle. We are going to plan, we are going to design, we're going to test, we're going to review, we're going to deploy, we're going to launch. So every minimum viable increment will go through a quick flow of planning, all the way to launching. And we will also create a strategy to create vertical slices. As we know, the minimum viable increment. So how can you create vertical slices and divide and deliver the increment one step at a time? So that's what normally happens at this side of the process, on the top of the process. So on the technical side, in terms of design, there are many different things we can do to enable that. So for example, one of them is to take the wireframes or the mockups and start thinking about the APIs. Let me just check for time. So, and start thinking about the APIs. We are very bad at it. Quite often we have backend developers focusing on their core domain, and they forget about, they don't care too much about how that domain is going to be used from the external world. And then they go and create this beautiful domain model. And then at some point, someone needs to say, well, but the mobile people, the front end, or so now we need to call these things. And that core domain is not ready to be called the way it is. So they create these adapter layers in the middle. How many systems I've seen that has this core domain protected in their hexagonal architectures and stuff like that? And then an API that makes no sense. So they are providing APIs to the front end, and the people from the front end is like, but I don't need all of that. I wouldn't. Why do I need to call 5 APIs to get what I want? Or why do I need to call 1 API, receive this massive amount of data, and do a lot of processing to get what I want? So why are we not providing just what I need? So for me, that's where outside-in design comes from. So as we are going to development, we need to understand whatever we are building as a software. So if we are building a product, there's no point in having a backend if there's no front end. There's no point in having a domain model if no one is consuming that. So we can look at the API and say, like, what is the external world expecting from us? And then you start designing APIs that will make sense for them to consume the service that we are providing. And this is all part of our development process, is when you start refining that integration between the backend and all the different clients that we might have. So here we'll be thinking about our macro design, our micro design, so how we're going to test that. So what are we going to do, what is our delivery mechanism? What is our core domain? So how are we going to test the thing that we are using? So what is our deployment strategy for this minimum viable increment? So all of those things we need to start thinking at this level. Another thing that we might do here is the design flow. So as we are taking a small increment, how are we going to arrange that code? We should not just go straight to code and start building whatever. So as soon as this MVI is triggered from outside, how are we going to organize this flow? Are we going to have components? What are the different levels of abstraction? Are we going to isolate the persistence or the infrastructure? So all those things are low-level design that we do constantly at a lower level. So at this level. And then even like the package structure as well. So quite often we open a system. As soon as we go to an application, we just open it in your IDE or whatever you use. And say like, okay, there is a bunch of namespaces and packages, and you have absolutely no clue what they are. So even thinking about how we're going to organize our package structure and things like that is important and is a continuous activity at this level. So what is the interplay between all those things at this level? Test and deployment strategies for each increment, which is great. So enables continuous delivery, of course, because we are thinking about that as we go along. Detailed design helps to identify risks, dependencies, and unknowns. Enables safe evolutions of the code while keeping it maintainable. So proactive and continuous technical improvement aligned with business value, but most importantly, it prevents accumulation of technical debt. So I think that this is what I like about this process, is because we are always proactively designing and improving our system as we are going along. And we are using the real business features to do so, and not just accumulating a lot of debt. So how do I see most of a lot of organizations working today? So there is a group of product owners that often don't have a good vision for the product. They don't own the vision. They don't own the product. So this product definition is normally quite vague when it exists. What they work on normally is a product roadmap, which is not all often based on something a little bit more concrete. It's just an aspirational roadmap. I don't see a lot of milestones of achieving short-term goals. They create a big plan, so that's our goal. They create a well-structured and rigid product backlog, and then they will go one after another, one thing after another. But they are not, they inspect and adapt business-wise, one milestone at a time, quite often is missing in some of organizations. And then they will work, so they jump. They go all the way from a high-level strategy for the product, from a product roadmap, all the way to the user stories. Nothing much in between. Then, when we have architects, so they are normally creating a product architecture and detailed architecture, but completely detached from the product goals, because they don't talk to each other. So this is created without taking the technical input, and the technical architecture and detailed architecture are also normally created without taking the business input. So there is a detachment from the two when that happens. Also, you end up creating, I've seen a lot of organizations creating this high-level architecture, but with no connection to the business, and also no connection with the development team, and the things that we need to do incrementally. And this design in the middle, our components, the way we're going to arrange our code and testing, this is not done because we are always chasing the next user story, always chasing the next user story. So for me, introducing the concept of milestones, business milestones, and forcing us to think about the solution, the technical solution for milestones, will help to balance this graph. So what I would like to see more is a single strategy. So a product and technical strategy as a single thing. I've been talking a lot about the business and technology. I mentioned that as a problem at the beginning, and I kept saying business and technology as a separate thing throughout the talk. There are skill sets. So some people, people more related to the business, their skill sets are better used at this level, and our skill set is better used at this level. But that doesn't mean that we are a separate team. So one of the ideas with this approach is to make sure that the ideation phase is done by both business and technology together. Although the graph shows separate things, those things are together, right? So it's just a way to represent that. But this should be a single box, the ideation box. We all together, business and technology, we're going to think about the problem, what we're trying to achieve. We will say, look, you know what? Now that we are trying to achieve that, let us try to validate this thing. Let's see if we can run a proof of concept. Is it even feasible? So there is a mutual feedback. This is not like we do a lot of work in here, we hand it over to technology, technology does a lot of work in here and then hand it back. No, this is a continuous conversation, right? So that's how that should work. So this also looks quite waterfallish, right? So when you look at it and say, like, wow, but are we introducing all those rigid design steps? Are we going to take forever to start developing code? Not necessarily. So this thing in here, you need to take as long as it takes. It's better to spend a little bit more time up front to see if your product is viable than just go crazy developing stuff. And then 6 months later, 9 months later, after a lot of money spent, you discover that that's not a good idea. So sometimes just spending a little bit more time in here is enough. How much we need to discover? It depends on your business. So the inception phase might take like 2 days, or might take like, God knows, 2-3 months. It really depends on how innovative your business is, how many unknowns. So all of those kind of things will impact the size of this. And this is true for all the other layers. The more you know about your product, as you are going through your product, developing new features, new milestones, you get a good understanding of it. Chances are that your product architecture is not going to change much. The vision of your product is not going to change much. So as you iterate and you come back to this layer, maybe the first time you spent, I don't know, a few weeks, maybe 1 week, maybe 2 days. But as you come back, normally should be faster, unless that your new milestone is completely different and introduce a lot of new risks, and then you need to spend more time. But there's no correlation in here, like introducing those levels doesn't mean that we are going to now introduce months of work before we get there. A simple whiteboard session is enough sometimes to define the product architecture, as long as we know more about what we are doing and stuff. A proof of concept can be done in a matter of few days. So those kind of things. So don't think that this is much. It's not a formal process of design. It's just like creating the place for doing those activities. I think this is another thing that I want to say is the idea here is to formally create the space for this to happen. Because at the business level, it happens. As we are finishing the user stories or MVIs, they are recalibrating the product backlog. They are analyzing, they're getting that feedback and reprioritizing the backlog. We should take that opportunity as soon as we finish the next MVI and we go back and say like, okay, we are now in a new milestone. Let's formally take a few days, 2 days, 1 week, and let's plan this next milestone together on the business side and technology side. Let's sketch. Let's see which technology. Let's create a strategy so you can formally do that. And here the same thing. As soon as the milestone is done, let's go back to this. Let's see what the next milestone is. Let's review together. So you create formally the space for that. In a software product, software design should be an explicit part of the business strategy. And I think that software design, there's no way to avoid design, right? So even if you don't think about design, as soon as you code, there will be some sort of design in there. But if you are deliberate about designing, we can use software design not only to help us to write code and find what we need, but also to support the whole business strategy. If you're interested in craftsmanship, I wrote the Software Craftsman book, and there is a new book from Uncle Bob, like Bob Martin, called Clean Agile. It's going to be, I think that the Kindle version is already out, and the paperback is going to be out in a week or so. So I wrote 1 chapter of the book, so it's quite good to go back and see what Agile was meant to be in a very clean way. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Sandro. So we have a short break now, and we'll be back in the room ready to start again at 10:15. That'd be great.